Hey there folks, the #1 Imperial Triumphant fan from the Infinite Jukebox, here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Imperial Triumphant record, Goldstar. Imperial Triumphant are somewhat of a difficult band for me personally because on one hand they are wildly inconsistent. They have some records that are really strong, some that I think are pretty mediocre to outright bad, and generally speaking one track to the next on the average Imperial Triumphant album isn't really that consistent in terms of quality. But even with that in mind, they are undeniably one of the most boundary pushing, unique, distinguishable bands within the general metal sphere at this point in the genre's history. I mean, sure, you may not love them, you may not even love death metal or black metal, but when you hear an Imperial Triumphant track, it sounds like something that only they could have put out despite having their obvious influences. I mean, their avant-garde take on death black metal fusion, their ginormous sound, the occasional dabblings into jazz and other various non-metal genres that they so frequently incorporate into their music, it has made them more than unique among the crowd of otherwise highly experimental, extreme metal bands out there. But even still, most of their records have felt a touch self-indulgent at times, sonically kind of muddy, that being a major issue I have with a large portion of their discography, if I'm being completely honest. And now here we are with Goldstar, their latest studio album, and a record that kind of achieves something that feels like a hugely rare feat. And I say that because this is arguably Imperial Triumphant's least experimental record to date, but it somehow manages to rank among their best and most consistent, and in that sense, it feels like a rare, extremely rare at that example, of a band doing less and somehow coming out with more at the end of the day. Goldstar is seemingly more focused on highlighting Imperial Triumphant's roots as a band, those roots undeniably being within the realm of avant-garde death metal and some avant-garde black metal, though the latter is maybe a little bit more subtle here than the former, but nonetheless, this is still a record that has all of the same structurally progressive leanings, all of the same left field kind of beats that you would expect Imperial Triumphant to cover, but it also does feel like less of a fully experimental record compared to some of their past works. This is more definitively sticking around in the base ideas and concepts that have made up Imperial Triumphant's sound really kind of since day one, if I'm being completely real. I mean, there are some moments here that admittedly do have the same degree of experimentation seen on records like 2020's highly acclaimed and beloved Alphaville, for example. Some examples of that being things like the electronic, semi-ambient passage on the track Hotel Sphinx, for example, or the atmospheric kind of opening to the album closer, Industry of Misery, just being kind of highlights of Imperial Triumphant, still holding on to some of their more experimental and boundary-pushing kind of moments to ensure that they don't fully lose their creative identity throughout Goldstar, something that is certainly a possibility when groups kind of strip things back a little bit and go more towards their definitive singular core sound rather than adding all of those extra experimental embellishments. But because of that, this still feels like Imperial Triumphant raw and unfiltered. At most, I would actually say that this is them at their best. I mean, I don't necessarily think that this is their best album overall, but it's certainly among their best because it really does feel like something that we've never truly seen from Imperial Triumphant before as a band, a group solely focused on making their core sound of avant-garde death metal and doing it in the only way that they know how, without extra ideas and concepts being stacked on top of it. And a lot of those extra additions from previous records that honestly, a lot of times were trial and erroring a lot of various bizarre and interesting, admittedly, ideas and concepts. A lot of those are done away with here, and the result is a rare case of a band like Imperial Triumphant feeling like a raw band rather than just a group stepping away from what they do best. They always have had a plethora of interesting ideas, no question, but there always has felt like there was a lack of a means of executing them well, with, again, a lot of my issues with their past records relating to a sense of directionlessness, some muddy production, records that I just never personally clicked with on the deeper emotional level, despite them always being fascinating and always being well thought out. And now some pre-existing Imperial Triumphant fans may in turn walk away from Goldstar feeling extremely disappointed. If you are someone who got into this band because they were this singular, completely unique, and at times very sonically and stylistically very extra kind of group, this may not appeal to you nearly as much. But if you are someone that can appreciate a band kind of dialing back some of those qualities a little bit for the sake of really honing in on what makes their basic sound what it is, and also turning that into something that feels a bit more elevated than the average avant-garde death metal band, I think you will be able to appreciate this. I mean, after all, while it does feel like one of the most, if not the most, meat and potatoes type outing that we've ever gotten from Imperial Triumphant to date, I still think that their latest record manages to feel just as sonically and stylistically interesting as they've ever really felt, and I can't really dock at any points in regards to coming across as unique or interesting and failing to do that here, when honestly it just still sounds like them. It just sounds like them taking a step back from some of those extra ideas to create something that's a little bit more definitive of what they generally base their ideas around. And honestly, I think a large part of that just has to do with the fact that this record is, perhaps more so than anything that they've released in the past, heavily focused and able to hone in on the instrumental and musical abilities of the band. I mean, they've always been technically impressive. No one's saying that they aren't. That would just be a foolish statement to make. But I've always felt like some of their past records, even their more popular releases, kind of haven't really done the best job in highlighting those talents, mainly using them for, again, certain self-indulgences that I've just always felt were a bit dry and disinteresting at times, not really giving every member the chance to really just show off what they do well as a unit. But here on this record, everyone really does shine. I mean, Zachary Ezrin's guttural vocal work kind of comes from the days of the death metal of old, but in a very good way, kind of really having a deeper tone to this record that wouldn't be there without that particular style of vocalization, and his guitar work remains as peculiar yet as disciplined and well-timed as ever, with tracks like Pleasure Dome and Gomorrah Nouveaux, the former of which interestingly features drum work from two legends in the form of Meshuggah's Tomas Hake and also Dave Lombardo of multiple bands, but most famously, of course, Slayer. They feature these devastating riffs with strange time signature changes, with much of his guitar work every now and again kind of turning into these atmospheric walls of sound that feel more directly related to some of their black metal influences that really do give this album a degree of variety, going between the kind of avant-garde death riffs that you would expect from a band that falls within that category, but at the same time providing, again, some of those atmospheric moments that do provide an extra degree of texturing, provide an extra degree of dynamicism throughout this entire record, and in general, I think that this record really does highlight their direct ties to both of those respective subgenres of metal and their more avant-garde sides as a whole. And elsewhere, Steve Blanco and Kenny Grohowski's bass and percussion work, respectively, make up a really strong rhythm section that ensures Goldstar is consistently held down without ever being afraid to change its pace and structural direction, because when I first went into this record and began to notice just how different this album felt, a big concern of mine was that Imperial Triumphant would also lose their daringness in terms of composition, but that just really isn't the case here whatsoever. They still sound as instrumentally excellent as ever. They are still just as much of an avant-garde, death, black metal band, whatever you want to consider them, as they are a progressive metal band at heart, and it leaves a lot of the instrumentals here feeling just as heavy as they do generally interesting and complex, leaving me feeling like this is maybe the record where each of the individual instrumentalists that make up Imperial Triumphant are at their most directly highlighted. I mean, sure, past records have had some great moments instrumentally speaking, but I really do feel like this record represents something more powerful from an instrumental perspective than really anything else that they've put off in the past, and I really do enjoy this one as an instrumental release from Imperial Triumphant. I mean, don't get me wrong, in general, I just think this album is very well produced, and as a whole, the fact that they strip things back here to reveal their rawer components conceptually is great, but just from the perspective of trying to appreciate Imperial Triumphant as a group of musicians making the brand of metal that suits them and speaks to them, I think it does a great job and really showcasing those individual talents more so than anything they've really done in the past. Goldstar may potentially be something that Imperial Triumphant fans, pre-existing fans of the band to specify, may view as a minor disappointment. And I can kind of see why if I look through the lens of someone who really adored their past records. I mean, the band's roots may never be lost here, but I think even for people like myself that do enjoy Goldstar, it is undeniable that the majority of this record is nowhere near as experimental, nowhere near as daring as some of their past records. Even if there are some pretty forward-thinking moments throughout this record, it just doesn't quite touch those same levels as some of their recent work that has been, in my eyes, nowhere near as good as this. I mean, it is for that exact reason that I think this feels like one of Imperial Triumphant's most creatively successful and musically successful records to date. I mean, the band continue to embrace the offbeat sound that makes them so unique structurally and sonically, while also ensuring that none of it is made overly muddy by outside concepts being introduced to a larger idea here. I mean, this is just the band doing their particular brand of musically, again, sort of forward-thinking, avant-garde death metal with some black metal elements just sprinkled in there for good measure, and doing it well, because Imperial Triumphant here are as unique as they've ever been. But Goldstar really does pull off the rare achievement of being a band dialing in their ambition and making a record that actually manages to surpass many of their previous works with fewer ideas being presented here. I don't really see a ton of bands being able to pull off something like that. A lot of records like this feel like they end up being creatively bankrupt or just don't have nearly as much to say artistically as some other works that certain artists have put out. So it's nice to see Imperial Triumphant not only be able to pull it off and put out a good album by kind of taking things back, taking things down a notch a little bit, but also managing to put out what I would consider to be one of their best records just by going through that method and being themselves in their raw and unfiltered form. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this album review. Thank you for watching The Infinite Jukebox, and I'll see you in the next one.